Before Berniece Courtemanche became a name associated with the mystery of the Connecticut River Valley murders, she was 17 years old. She was still in high school, she worked as a nurse's aide, and she had a boyfriend named Toby Colby. And in the spring of 1984, Berniece was staying with Toby and his family. According to Toby's recollections in the Dark Valley podcast, Berniece and her mother had been experiencing some conflict at home. Like many teenagers and their parents, they don't always agree with Bernice's choices or the boundaries her mother wanted her to follow. For a time, Berniece found another place to stay with Toby's family. That detail matters because it brings us to May 30th, 1984, and one of the last ordinary afternoons of Bernice's life. Much of what we know about these personal moments comes from Toby's interview with Dark Valley. Their reporting preserved details about Berniece that simply don't appear in the short official summaries of her case. And those details allow us to see Berniece as more than a cold case victim. May 30th, 1984. According to Toby, Berniece arrived back around 3:30 that afternoon. She was warming up chop suey. Toby, meanwhile, needed to help his brother with a transmission. It was mundane, normal. There was no reason for either of them to believe that these moments would become important. Berniece indicated that she could get a ride home with a coworker. Toby expected her later. He waited for approximately 2 hours. Berniece never arrived. Looking back decades later, Toby expressed the kind of regret that comes only with hindsight. The feeling that if he had only known what was about to happen, he would have done something differently. But he couldn't have known. Someone needed help with the transmission. Berniece was warming up dinner. A ride could be arranged. Nothing about that afternoon announced what was coming. The white truck. There is another piece of Bernice's story that has remained part of the mystery. In his Dark Valley interview, Tony discussed a reported sighting of Berniece getting into a white truck with 2 men inside. If that sighting was accurate, it could be incredibly important. But we need to make an important distinction. There was a reported sighting of Berniece getting into that truck. That doesn't necessarily establish that Berniece actually did. Eyewitness information can provide investigators with crucial leads. It can also be mistaken. More than 4 decades later, there are questions we can't answer from the information publicly available. How certain was the witness that the girl was Berniece? When was the sighting reported? Was the white truck ever identified? Who were the 2 men? And was any part of the account independently corroborated? Maybe someone really did see Berniece getting into that truck. Maybe that moment contains an important clue about what happened to her. Or maybe the person saw someone else. Without additional evidence, we can't know. And that's where we have to leave it. Berniece is missing. What we do know is that Berniece didn't arrive when she was expected. The following day, she was reported missing. And then the waiting began. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, an entire year passed. Berniece was still missing. Then another spring arrived. On April 19, 1986, nearly 2 years after Berniece disappeared, her remains were discovered. Berniece had been killed. The teenager who had been warming up chop suey on an ordinary afternoon wasn't coming home. Questions investigators couldn't answer. Toby's interview also provides another glimpse into the frustration surrounding an investigation that continued over many years. He recalled that investigators eventually wanted to speak with the father of one of Bernice's former boyfriends, but considerable time had already passed. According to Toby's account, before investigators were able to conduct that interview, the man suffered a heart attack and died. We need to be very careful about what that means. The fact that investigators wanted to speak with someone does not mean that person was suspected of killing Berniece. It doesn't establish wrongdoing. And his death before investigators could interview him isn't evidence of anything sinister. It simply leaves another question that may never be answered. What did investigators want to ask him? Perhaps he knew something important. Perhaps he didn't. An interview that never happened is a missing piece of an investigation, not evidence of guilt. A larger mystery. Bernice's death would eventually become associated with a series of unsolved homicides in the Connecticut River Valley, and the timing is difficult to ignore. Bernice disappeared on May 30th, 1984. Less than 2 months later, Ellen Freed disappeared from the Claremont area. Over time, investigators and others would examine whether Bernice, Ellen, and several other women were victims of the same unidentified offender. That person became popularly known as the Connecticut River Valley Killer. But here in Grace and Gavel, there's an important distinction we want to maintain throughout this series. Connected does not mean proven connected. No one has been convicted of Berniece Courtemanche's murder. We don't know with certainty who killed her. We don't know whether the white truck was involved. And we don't know whether an interview that never happened would have changed anything. Those aren't blanks for us to fill with speculation. They're unanswered questions. Before Bernice became a cold case, cold cases can reduce a human life to a handful of dates and locations. May 30th, 1984, April 19th, 1986, Claremont, Newport, 17 years old. But Toby's memories give us something different. For a moment, we get Bernice back. She's 17. She's warming up chop suey. Her boyfriend is helping his brother with the transmission. She thinks she has a way home. He thinks he'll see her later. Nobody knows that these completely ordinary decisions are about to become memories examined for decades. And maybe that's why those seemingly insignificant details are so important. Berniece Courtemanche wasn't born to become part of a true crime story. She was a daughter, a student, a young woman who cared for other people through her work, a girlfriend, a 17-year-old whose life was still unfolding. Someone took all of the tomorrows she should have had. More than 40 years later, we still don't know who. Bernice deserves more than a place on a list of possible victims. She deserves to be remembered, and she deserves an answer. I also want to list sources and further listening. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit and the Dark Valley podcast are some of our sources. We especially want to acknowledge Dark Valley for its interview with Toby Colby and for preserving many of the personal recollections used in telling Bernice's story. Because unfortunately, when we tried to dig deeper, I even got onto a personal page that people were talking about Bernice and some of the Connecticut River Valley killing victims. A lot of people didn't want to talk for whatever reason. Some people even suggested Kellyville, which was particularly helpful. But as someone who is not living around New Hampshire in that area, it can be really difficult to get access to some of the materials that could be used. So that's where Dark Valley helped us. And I just want to say from one podcaster to another, thank you. If you have a true crime case in my neck of the woods at some point in time, feel free to let me return the favor. I just want to say thank you so much. This has definitely been a project where we wanted to not just lump everyone together because they're not the same person. You know, it's not like they were related. I mean, they were related in the fact of who took their lives, but beyond that, they're as different as night and day in a lot of ways. And I think that we came to the decision that we wanted to essentially feature each woman as her own standalone person so people could understand the impact of the loss that the family had and the friends had and those who knew them. So I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in. If you got value from this, please feel free to like and subscribe. Additionally, we are currently planning a one-off episode, and then we'll be going into another series here very, very soon. So thanks so much for your support. It means a lot, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.